moved it a little so I can bend it back and check it. It's okay if it moves as long as you've got it completely covered. And your 1/4 inch seam allowance could differ. No, it's still pretty good, but if it shifts, it's still okay. So let's press this open, and we're ready then to add this side. The great thing about working with the watercolor fabric is you don't have a right or a wrong side. So if you happen to cut something out and there's a left and a right, just turn it over. But first, I want to press here, fold that, and I want to trim that so it's easier to line up. Now, let's just say I had this backwards and I was lining it up, and that's the way it goes. And see, this doesn't have fabric under it. So let's flip it around, line it up, and that's pretty tight right there. But it's covered, so it works. I could shift it a little this way so it's more centered on that fabric. Hold my finger there, bring it to my machine. I think I moved it a little. This here is called a stiletto, and it happens to be a porcupine quill. But when you're sewing, sometimes you don't want your finger underneath the presser foot or near the needle, so you can use something like this to kind of hold it. And it looks good. You can see it shifted there. As long as I cover, I'm good, and I do. So let's iron this and trim it, and we'll move on to D. All right, so let's put C where it's gonna belong. And then D I've already done for you. It's exactly the same with a different dimension. So let's see what our bottle's gonna look like. There we go. Now let's assemble and sew those all together. All right, we're gonna start up here. It doesn't matter what order you sew them in, just make sure that you sew them to the right portion. And so you wanna make sure, if you leave the paper on, it's easy to do, but sometimes I'll take a fat pin and I'll go through the 1/4 inch corner there, and hopefully the 1/4 inch corner in the back. And I'll do the other side, lining it up. And see, I'm not quite on, so I can adjust that so that I get it lined up. There we go. I like that now, but I can't leave those in and sew, so I use glass-headed pins. Glass-headed pins don't melt with the iron, and they have a very thin shaft, and so you can actually sew over them slowly and not break a needle. So I hold that so it doesn't move this way or that way and shift. And then I go on one side of the pin and out the other, and I remove the fat pin. So now I'm ready to sew. I'm gonna sew right down. I'm gonna start here, and I'm gonna sew straight down there. So let's do that. The stiletto also helps you feed and stabilize your piece if you get movement. It slipped off the pin, but that's what you want it to do. So I'm going to remove my pins, take a look at my piece. I like it. Now, working with paper piecing, if you've never done it before, you hate the paper by the end of this. But I'm just going to manipulate this, and I'm going to take off this paper now. I'm not taking off all, I'm just taking off what's in that seam. And I like to press my seams open. I'll finger press first. And you can see how nice that matches up. As long as you're sewing straight on that line, it should match up perfect. And so there's our first part. Now let's do the bottle with the top of the bottle the same way. Sometimes it takes a couple tries. Yeah, I never used to like these quilting fat pins, but they're really great for matching up seams. I use this technique whether it's paper piecing or just regular piecing to get my points right. And now we're ready to sew. We're gonna sew straight down this line. Now, if you don't like sewing over pins, that's fine. You can remove them as you go. I would get it started and I would tug it out. And when you come up on it, I would wait till I got really close so you don't lose that matched point. And let's see how we did here. Again, I'm gonna fold this, kind of over manipulate the paper. And because we use such a small size stitch, look how easily that comes off. Sometimes you will use a tweezer to get the most of it out. Finger press it open. Iron it flat. And we're almost done with our block. We're gonna sew these two pieces together. So we're gonna do exactly the same thing we did. And I think you know what I'm gonna do. This is our last seam in the block, so let's just sew these together and see what it looks like. I'm going to press it over and open and tear out the paper. So we have our first of 21 blocks done. You're going to sew these alternating your bottle colors, your label colors, and your background colors. If you look at the pattern, you'll notice that there are 3 values in each. There are 3 greens, there are 3 purples, there are 3 blues for backgrounds, and there are 3 brown tones. 2 are for the labels, and the last one, taupe, is for the top and the bottom of the blocks. So now you're going to make all those, and let's see what it's like to sew them together. I do not take out the paper till I've sewn them together. I have 2 bottles and I'm ready to put them together. Now, in the pattern, some are right side up, some are upside down. You can make those decisions so you can follow it exactly. I'm going to use the pin method again, and I'm actually going to go in right here so that the brown taupe matches up. I'm going to do this to all 4 corners. So I'm going to sew this together, and I put in my 2 pins. I'm going to double pin it with my glass-headed pins. Remove these. And you can see the paper is starting to tear because I'm manipulating it. I don't mind. I'm only using it to match it up. I may even want to put in one here just to make sure that it's perfect. So I'll just put in another glass-headed to hold it. And let's sew through our seam allowances all the way down. I like to keep these open, and that's why I press it. So because this is tumbled, they're down here. So when I get down here, I'll double check that they're open. And this paper wants to push that closed, so I'm just gonna tear that piece off so it can be open. Now, if you did sew over one of your seams and it bent, I wouldn't pull it out. It just gives you a flatter quilt if they're opened. Okay, I'm coming up to this section. I'm going to take my stiletto and I'm going to sweep it under there to keep it flat. And now I'm going to kind of press down on there. That works most of the time. You could starch it as well and make sure that it lays flat. So let's see what we end up with here. I would manipulate the seam. But there we go. We have 2 wine bottles. Now you might notice that there's some discoloration here. This is completely optional. All right, I use sometimes these ink pens either by Fabrico or Tombow. And you can literally just kind of sweep that on the edge to darken it so that you get a little more dimension. I use inks a lot of times on my quilts. It has another tip, which is like a brush, and then you can lay it down and lightly shade. These have to be heat set, so I would iron it. And that's just a way of adding dimension to your bottle. You can see this one's not done, these two are done. So let's sew a group of them together. On page 5 in your pattern, we've supplied for you a wine bottle label that you're welcome to use. You don't have to, you can even make your own up. Keep in mind, I run it through an inkjet printer and it's not permanent. If you wash it, it will fade, it may disappear. But the way to do it, I'm gonna show you, is you get an 8.5 by 11 sheet of freezer paper. You don't have to buy this, but it comes pre-cut. You can cut it from yours in the kitchen. So you have a dull side and a shiny side. The shiny side, when hot, is sticky. So you cut a piece of fabric, and you don't want any loose threads, so I cut it a little smaller, and I'm gonna iron it to the freezer paper. Now I can just iron it there. If I iron over here, I'm gonna get it on my iron. So I'm gonna turn this upside down to the dull side, and I'm gonna iron it. So when I turn it over, I'm going to feed this through my inkjet printer, not a laser printer, just like paper, usually the right side down, and I'm going to print my label. Now I've already done that, and I've printed up 4 different labels. 2 are from the pattern, and 2 I designed or used something off of the internet. Now when I'm piecing my bottle, I can use this piece for there. And just to show you, I've done one, but I did it using inks. And so I made my own. So you could use it as a label for your quilt. You could put your name on it. You can color it in. You can do whatever you want. It's your quilt, and have fun with it. So as you can see, I've made a lot of bottles, and I've alternated them right side up, upside down, and changed the colors to where I wanted. I've shaded some of my labels. Let's take this one and let's add it there. I have paper on my end, so I'm going to match it up and pin it. I pinned it here, and you'll notice there's a pin in the middle. Because we're working with a long expanse, I just sent a fat one through, making sure that it was on the line. And you can see there's some give in here, so there may be some stretching. Iron your underneath pretty flat. And let's just take our time and sew this. Giving it a little bit of a tug so it lines up. See how it looks. It looks great. So I'm going to iron the seam open. All right, so we've got this sewn. It's nice and flat, and you can see how that kind of floats compared to that. So I'm just going to come in. First, I'm just going to kind of draw the edge, and then I'm going to darken it here so that it looks like it's set back a little. I use my fingernail to keep it from going on the block next to it. And sometimes I actually spritz it with water so that it bleeds just a little bit, because we're talking about watercolor fabrics, and so it's not going to mess that up. I have a little bit